We'll leave that with you, but leave it here. Almost 2.
Yeah, it's 1:58.
I guess not.
Hashtag. Because he's like, but it's not.
What's your thought? Do they need, you want to clear it?
I did.
I decided not to get too long. Okay, I think I've got 2 o'clock, don't we? Hey, good afternoon. How's everybody doing? We got a big Zoom crowd. There's 2. High level demand. So the first thing I want to do, I mean, I have been beleaguered by investment classes here lately, right? And some of you have been there every step of the way with me. But no 2 have been the same. I mean, no 2 have been the same. And everybody has a point of view and everybody has good information. By the way, I don't think I've ever been to a session where I didn't learn something, but I also don't think I've ever been to a session where I learned everything. You know, you pick and choose looking for things that you can pull out. And by the way, that's always my attitude going in. My attitude going in is I'm only here to pull out my ahas or to pull out certain things. I don't expect it all to be helpful. And I don't expect none of it to be helpful. Does that make sense? But part of that's a mindset thing. I go in with this idea that everybody I come into contact with has the ability to help me. So I'm looking for how they're helping me. And I thought Lance had some very interesting things to say. Now, he didn't talk just about investing in a pure sense. He talked a lot about taxation. And his whole thing about accelerated depreciation through segmentation was really a accelerated depreciation concept. And by the way, we were talking about that for your properties. If your properties don't have a pretty high price, 1,500 is a pretty high number.
Yep.
Okay, because what happens on the depreciation, you're just deferring. You're deferring depreciation, or I'm sorry, you're accelerating depreciation, which means later years, it'll be less than it would have been on a straight line basis. So all you're gaining there is time, but you're coming out of pocket $1,500. That's out of pocket. But that was interesting. Work for your kids. I've heard that before, and it's a good concept if you're disciplined. I like the idea that he has, what did he say? He had 18 properties. 18 properties. And by the way, I like the idea. He said, we're not set up to sell any of them. He's a buy and hold guy. We talked about that last week. Buy and hold takes you where? What's the word? Starts with a W. Wealth. Buy and sell takes you where? Cash. Yeah. Now, buy and sell, you may have to do buy and sell to have the cash to do buy and hold. That's possible, right? Okay. And then today, Caleb, holy cow. Caleb is very knowledgeable. And obviously Wally is too, because that's where Caleb got to be knowledgeable. And Wally's very successful. The only thing I would say to Caleb is don't underestimate how much more complicated multifamily is than single family. Now, the concepts are the same. So next week or whenever they do their second one, we'll analyze the property. That will be the same. Analyzing the property will be the same. But the whole idea of property management, the whole idea of the repairs, the whole idea of zoning and all kinds of things I personally, I brokered a couple of small apartment complexes up in the Denton area by UNT. I never bought a multifamily. And I just feel more comfortable with a single family. But anyway, so he had some interesting stuff about, he said this, one of the same things that we talked about is one of your really go-to sources for either properties or for investors would be other agents. And I think that's a big deal. I think you should always be talking to other agents about what have you got that we might be interested in buying? What do you have that we might be interested in buying, no matter where it is, no matter what it is. Now, he also talked about, he didn't use the word criteria. You need to have a criteria for what you're looking for. He called it your box. You recall that? Those of you who were there? And, but so it's criteria. What's your criteria? Last week, we talked about the numbers, and we talked about that $400,000 property. You put 20% down. Now, Lance said this. Did you catch this? Some lenders will let you do 15% down, but they're few and far between. He didn't say that part, but that's not a common thing. So you're going to have to seek that lender out. I'd also be interested in knowing what lenders will allow you to put a second on an 80-20 to make it an 80-10-10. If the lender will let you stack a second on top of the cash down payment. So it's an 80% first lien, a 10% second lien, and a 10% cash. Now, there's two ways to get the second lien that are fairly obvious. What are they? Lender, bank, and seller. Sellers, not a lot of sellers are going to finance the 80%, but you can get some sellers to finance a 10% second. Okay, but that's not going to work if the 80% first lien holder won't allow a second for an investment property. Everybody good on that?
Yep.
And then remember last week we talked about, well, let's say that your investor had the $400,000 in cash. They could pay cash for a $400,000 property. Now, Lance said that too. He said that $400,000 property might be able to be bought for like I'm changing the numbers, but the concept, he said you might get a deal, and he used a $50,000 discount for the property that he has found that's not on the market. I think his was $350, and it was probably, he could get it for $350, but it was worth $4. Is that about what it was, wasn't it? So okay, so I could pay cash and maybe I get a little bit of a discount. I would kind of expect that if I'm going to put that much cash into it. By the way, only on the front end, I can refinance it, fairly quickly, 6 months or so. The other thing we talked about last week was taking the $400,000 and buying five $400,000 houses at $80,000 down each. And then we talked about when Paul came up, and we talked about his properties in the condo in Richardson that he got 23 years ago, roughly, that you got probably in the clear $200,000, $250. Yeah. And so you could either pay $250 in cash for another property, or you could take that $250 and probably buy as many as 3 properties in the $300, $350 range with 20% down each, right? And remember, the more we borrow, what happens to the leverage? Higher or lower? Higher. It's a higher leverage factor. And that is one of the real magical parts of real estate. I mean, it's great to have some tax benefits, and it's great to have someone paying your mortgage, but to only put 20% down or 15 or 10 down, that is huge. And I also liked, and Caleb talked about this, 5 years from today, you look at and we're going to talk about that with the McCoys. We're going to show what their portfolio kind of looks like and what they have that they can do now. So those are some of the things we talked about last week, right? Now, I also mentioned Dave Ramsey in the podcast with Andy Andrews. Did anybody happen to see that? Okay, good, because I've got a report for you on that. And so it was Millionaire Baby Steps. And Ramsey's very articulate. How many of you have ever heard him speak live? Yeah, he was actually the keynote speaker at Family Reunion about 8 years ago. The first time they had it in Dallas, Dave Ramsey was the keynote speaker. First of all, the guy's hilarious. He's very funny and he's very knowledgeable and very articulate. But what he talked about was that his the baby steps, the millionaire baby steps, he has 7 steps that will help you become a millionaire. Now, I also said this last week. What's the definition of a millionaire? Is it somebody who makes $1 million in a year? No, that's income. It's net. It's net assets. Assets minus liabilities. What you own minus what you owe. So if your net worth is $1 million, it's not what you make, it's what you have. Okay, so here's his. I'm going to give you his, and I'll post these somewhere. Where will I post it? Oh, my assistant's gone. She and I'll figure that out. Okay, so here they are. Now I'm going to read through them fairly quickly, but I'll put them up someplace and we'll tell you where they are. But here's the concept on having these 7 steps. He's taking the $1 million goal net worth and chunking it down. Chunking it down to bite-sized pieces. And I'll tell you exactly how it went between he and Andy. Here they are, fairly quickly. All right, number 1, and it is number 1, not one of 7. Save or create a $1,000 emergency fund. That's the first thing you do. Second, pay off all your debt except for your homestead. Pay off all your debt except for your homestead. Now, how many of you have read a Dave Ramsey book? Okay, that's what he's known for. And he says on this podcast, it made perfect sense. He said, everywhere I go, you mention Dave Ramsey, they'll say, oh, get out of debt. He said, yeah, but the reason I want you to get out of debt is so that you can work toward being a millionaire. You can't be a millionaire with a lot of debt. Because with a lot of debt, you can't save much. And here's what he talked about. The first time I heard him say this, I really kind of disagreed with him, but now I agree with him. It's called the Snowball Effect. So you take all your loans that you might have, car loans, college student loans, credit card loans, okay? And you start paying off the smallest one, the one with the smallest balance. And then when you pay it off, you take the payments that were supposed to be made for that one and add those to the next smallest and prepay the next smallest. And that's called the snowball effect. See, now I'm Mr. Literal. Mr. Literal says, no. You should pay off the one with the highest interest rate first. And then the next, but if the one with the highest interest rate is the highest loan amount, it's going to take you longer to pay it off. There's a psychological impact here. And then the freeing up of the cash on your low balance can go toward paying off the next lowest. And that thing, it is like I don't know where he got this. It's like a snowball going downhill. It just gains momentum. So I do agree with him now. From a purist standpoint, you'd pay off the highest loan amount, highest interest rate. But from a practical standpoint, I think you'd pay off the lowest balance first. All right, so number 1, save or do the emergency. Number 2, pay off all your debt except for your home loan. Now, by the way, why wouldn't pay off your debt be first?
Because you need the nest egg in case something.
Yes, because you need the nest egg in case something were to happen. And if you don't have a nest egg, you'll find yourself borrowing again. So you'll just be yo-yoing between paying off money and borrowing it again and paying off money and borrowing it again. So first, create an emergency fund. And he says on the podcast, $1,000 is not enough, but that's what I want you to have to start with. Number 2, pay off all your debts. Number 3, add to your emergency fund so that it's a reasonable amount. And that would be different strokes for different folks, kind of what your lifestyle is, anywhere from $10,000 to $25,000. $10,000 to $25,000. I listened to another YouTube video that he did. I think it's with his sister. I think Rachel Cruz is his daughter. I mean, not sister, daughter. And so that the little talk they had was 10 things to do differently with your money in 2022. And one of them was keep your emergency fund funded. So if you take money out of your emergency fund, we got to go back in our 7 steps and rebuild the emergency fund up again before we go on, right? All right, otherwise you'll get caught short. All right, so we got 1, 2, and 3. 3 was add to your emergency fund. Number 4 is start putting 15% of your gross. And by the way, this is not that aggressive. 70-30 is more aggressive and certainly doable. He's talking about only 15%, not 30%. The more you can set aside, the faster this happens, because compounding becomes a part of this. But he said, put 15% of your gross into savings or retirement. That's number 4. Number 5 is start looking at any college needs you have for children or grandchildren. Any college needs you have for children or grandchildren. That's number 5. Number 6, pay off your house with the extra funds over and above the 15%. Pay off your home. And number 7, I love this one, live and give. Live and give. He said, I can literally show you that we can work it out. We talked last week about somebody who earned only $60,000. 15% of that was $9,000. Within about 12 to 14 years, they'll be a millionaire. Okay, so those are the. And he and Andy had this talk, and I thought this was very interesting because it also comes into the myths in this book. Remember the myth understandings? There were 8 myth understandings. One of them was, it's complicated. I can't do it. I can't do it. And so Andy Andrews was talking to Dave Ramsey about belief that you can do it. And Dave Ramsey said, let me just share how important belief is. If you don't believe you can do it, you probably can't. That's kind of that part of that Henry Ford quote. Whether you believe you can do it or not, you're right. But he said the reason I know it's important. And so the way I've approached it is 7 very simple steps. And then I give people all kinds of stories and all kinds of people's names to show they've already done it. And this was a great quote. This was a great quote. And to see that someone's already done what you want to do does make it more possible, doesn't it? Remember the 4-minute mile story? For those of you who know the 4-minute mile, they said it could never be done. And the first person who did it was a guy named Roger Bannister, broke the 4-minute barrier in the mile run. Once he broke that barrier, some crazy number, like within 90 days, 17 other people had broken it. But until he broke it, no one had ever broken it. So once you see that it's possible, even if it's in someone else's life, it becomes more possible for you. Now add this to that. Human beings require proof of progress to continue. That made perfect sense to me. Now we'll go back to a statement I made to you last week about having a personal financial statement, and that you should come up with a personal financial statement at the very least once a year. And that is your business scorecard. That's your business report card. And so the question is, last year, a year ago today, if I was worth $100,000 and today I'm only worth $50,000, I'm going the wrong direction. I'm going to get discouraged. Now, before I just quit, I think it would be wise for me to figure out, why am I going the wrong direction? And the chances are I'm spending more than I'm making. I'm going into debt. Right? But if I'm worth $100,000 a year ago and I'm worth $250,000 today, is that a ray of sunshine?
Sure.
Is that encouragement? Will that add to belief? Yes, very important. The first chapter in this book is about mindset. The very first chapter. And then so Ramsey and Andy Andrews talk about mindset and talk about believing that you can do it. So, all right, so here's what I want to do next. I was sitting there and I was thinking, at some point, we've got to figure out how to qualify people as investors. And by the way, I've got this dual thing going. You're either working with investors, you're looking for investors, or you are an investor, right? You don't have to buy a house to work with investors. Although you might need to be prepared to tell that investor why you don't have investment properties. You know, but I mean, if you're, Paul talked about last week, you were working with 2 investors as soon as we got done. So working with investors, you've got to know some qualifying questions to ask them. And that's different than a homeowner, isn't it? Slightly different than a homeowner. Now, do you need to ask yourself those same questions if you're an investor? Or do you need to have the answers ready in case someone asks you as an investor, what about this? What about that? Would you agree with this? All right, so what would be some of the things we would want to ask, and how would we want to ask an investor these questions? So give me some information that we would want to ask, but let's pose it in the form of a question.
What are your goals?
What are your goals?
Criteria.
What is your criteria?
Have you ever bought an investment property?
Have you ever bought an investment property? Who said that one? Okay. Molly, okay, so have you ever involved, okay, the reason I stopped on that one is we did this, some of you were with us and some of you weren't. The first 2 were called open-end questions. That's a closed-end question. So the answer is either what? Yes or no. All right, so the question really should be, you should consider the question being, what is your experience with investments? Because if I say yes, now you could follow up, and I think if you did phrase it that way, you would want to follow up. So you do have investment experience, yes. Give me some idea what that's like. How many properties have you bought? How many investors have you worked with? Let's just ask it that way in the beginning. What is your level of experience with regard to investing? Right? Okay. So all I'm doing is piggybacking on what we talked about in the before the end of the year. Jay?
Big question would be, tell me about cash on hand and or lender approval.
Okay, so tell me about cash on hand. I might say, well, what do you want to know about it? Yes. Now see, closed-end question. Do you have it? I might ask, how much do you have? And I might say, how much do you have readily available? Yeah, right. Okay. Look, I know this sounds nitpicking, but you need to know the answers to these questions in a very complete way, because they won't always volunteer all the details. But yes, the cash and the availability of the cash. And by the way, that's part of that criteria. How much cash do you have to invest? I don't really care how much cash they have. I want to know how much cash they have to invest and how accessible is it? Can you get it in a day? Is it going to take a week? Do you have to cancel a CD? Okay, now we got a problem. In this market, we got a problem, right? Okay. All right, what else do we want to know? Larry?
So if you're talking to somebody who doesn't have an investment property, what in the past has prevented you from buying an investment property?
Okay, what in the past has prevented you from investing in properties? What if the answer were to be, well, I was just always too nervous to do it? Well, I think I'd have a follow-up question. Well, what's given you more comfort to be ready to do it now? Because what I don't want is an investor wannabe. I don't want an investor wannabe. That's a waste of your time and theirs. But it sounds kind of sexy to say, oh, I got my broker, he's out looking for properties for me to invest in, you know. That's the sky. Hey, there's an ego piece to this. It's like the word, some of you have heard me use the word ownership. The word ownership. You just throw it, oh yeah, I got a little ownership in that. Of course, we don't know that they've lost their shirt on a little bit of ownership, right? All right, what else can you think of? Jack?
What cash on cash percentage are you expecting?
Yeah, what cash on cash or what kind of a return are you looking for? That's a good one. If I used cash on cash, I would want to make sure that I knew they understood what cash on cash meant. But that's a good one. What are your expectations as far as the return? that leads me to another question.
I would just ask, how have you educated yourself in investing?
All right, how have you educated yourself on the topic of investing? Yes, time frame. So, and that's going to be a function of the return. What's your plan? Are you planning on holding this property? Are you planning on flipping this property? How long would you hold this property? What are your goals? And part of your goals, part of your criteria, buy and hold versus buy and sell. If I get a buy and sell client as a client, I'll probably refer them to one of you guys. Because I don't want to look for that. Those are too hard for me. I think they're too hard to find and too risky. So I don't want to do that. You know, Jeff, some of you know Jeff Jacobs. Jeff Jacobs was in this office for a long while. And he's got a team and he's in Frisco now, and he was flipping properties. That's buy and sell. And he made money on the first one, he made money on the second one, he made money on the third one. On the fourth one, he lost all the money he had made on the first three. The only problem with that is he had spent the money he made on the first three. And I remember where the fourth one was. The fourth one was in Bent Tree. It was a house in Bent Tree. I want to say it was on Vista Dale, but I'm not positive. I'm close, something like that, right off of West Grove. It was his biggest one and his biggest bomb.
How did he lose? You know,
The market turned.
that's what we're all wondering here.
The market turned.
Okay.
Yep. Okay, what other questions? What other questions are you thinking about that you need to know from them, or you need to be prepared to answer on your own?
1031.
Yeah. Have you ever done a 1031? Is that something you might be interested in the future? Be prepared for it. I have no idea what that is. Okay.
Some of the reason why I say that is some that I talk to, they actually are doing a 1031 without telling you. And then.
Okay,
that
and then you
timeline.
need to know that.
Yeah.
Because that changes the timeline on things a lot. That's a great one. Great one. Thank you.
How about, is there anybody else that's going to be involved in this?
Yes. Is there an Uncle Joe? Is there an Uncle Joe who has to give permission for you to do this?
I was thinking a wife or a husband, but okay.
Well, the Uncle Joe. Anyway, it could be, we used to do that in the CRS class. We call him Uncle Joe. Is there anybody else who you have to get approval from? No, that you want to get approval, not even have to. But, oh yeah, you know, my Uncle Joe, I like him to look over everything I do. He's an attorney. Oh, okay. Let me give you Paul Bush's now. Paul specializes in working with attorneys. But that's a great one. Who else has got to be a part of this, you know? Any other things you can think of?
Multifamily versus single family.
Multifamily versus single family, which would be a component of the criteria, but that's becoming more specific, and I think makes sense. Makes sense. Now, if it's multifamily, I'm real interested in what experience level they have. I would be interested on the front side about whether you have ideas about managing the property yourself. You don't have to make a firm decision, but are you thinking about that? Because if I wanted to show you some numbers and you were going to manage it yourself, I wouldn't put in property management as an expense. But then I would ask, what kind of experience do you have at managing properties?
Another one would be, are you the kind of investor that wants to be able to drive by your investment, look at it all the time? I have an investor in Garland that won't buy outside of Garland because they want to be able to drive by anytime they want.
Oh, so we'll talk about that here in a few minutes. So yeah, is this got to be in a certain area? What did Caleb call it? He called it your box at one point, but he was talking about your market at another point. Yeah, I bought a house in North Carolina. Why did I buy it there? Well, two reasons. My grandkids live in North Carolina, so I go there a fair amount. But do you think I go by and look at it every time I go to North Carolina? No. The broker called me up and he says, I think this property is very undervalued. You'll have to pay cash for it. It's like $145,000 about 5 years ago. And one of those calls that you get every other day, asking if you'd be interested in selling your property. So how about your North Carolina property? If you'd be interested in selling it, I could get you $280,000 net. 5 years later, I paid 145. But that's important if you're open. Now, by the way, if someone had called me and said, I got a property in Cleveland, Ohio, that's really, and by the way, the North Carolina property, the brokers who recommended it to me also had a property management company and they manage it. That was a very important thing. But if you had something really hot in Cleveland, Ohio, I got no tie there, and I don't want to have to deal with that. Because the property managers in North Carolina have handyman, insurance, they gave me the insurance guy to go to, they give me, everything I need, they can do. All right, so those are all good. Let me read mine real quick. I'm going to read you the closed-end version and then the open-end version. Do you have money to invest? The answer could be what? Yes or no. How much money do you have to invest? Is your money available? How quickly can your money be available? Can you look at or react to properties quickly? Now, what's the problem with that? Let's say the answer is yes. Well, I have an idea of what quickly is, and now you have your idea of what quickly is. How about this? How quickly can you make a decision? I might add, do you feel like you have to see inside the property to make a decision? Right? Are you an experienced investor? What's your level of experience as an investor? Do you have a specific time frame? What is your time frame? Do you have a specific criteria? What is your criteria? Are you looking at buy and hold or buy and sell? What are your thoughts about buy and hold or buy and sell? Do you need positive cash flow? What are your needs regarding cash flow? Is there anyone else who needs to sign or agree to the purchase? Yes, Uncle Joe. Who else needs to sign or agree to purchase? Are there any things I can explain or clarify for you? What can I explain or clarify for you that we haven't talked about? You see how changing it to an open-end question elicits probably more detailed responses and therefore better communications. Everybody see that? I'm just fascinated by learning to ask great questions. And I'm getting better slowly, but slowly but surely. Okay, so just a couple other little things. In the blue book, there's a couple of phrases I just want to go over with you. It talked about having intentional investments versus accidental assets. And in the blue book, what they talked about was your home. And a lot of people now will look back on their first home and say, gosh, I wish I had kept that home. That's been my best investment I've ever had, So that you didn't look at it as an investment until it was already gone. So it was an accidental asset. It wasn't an intentional investment. On the other hand, I know there's people in this room who bought their first home or bought a home with the absolute intention of converting it to a rental property and then moving to the next home. And then maybe repeating that process again. Real estate is an able investment. On page 99, there's about 5 different reasons. By the way, he had most of those reasons on the differences between real estate, stocks, bonds, etc. on his kind of his spreadsheet, Caleb. Trammell Crow, I gave you this last week. The way to wealth is debt. I gave you this last week, real estate. Over the last 30 years, 1972 to 2002, so that wasn't the last 30 years, but when the book was written, it was pretty close. Real estate averaged 6.1% appreciation a year. 6.1. If you have to finance your lifestyle, you can't afford it. Anyone can do it, not everyone will you? The more money people make, the more overconfident they tend to be about their financial future. Holy cow. getting kind of personal now. And then remember, the wealthiest people, it's always based on net worth. Net worth. All right. Questions, comments, thoughts? You know, Amy made a great statement before we started. Amy always makes a lot of great statements, but the one I'm thinking of that Amy made most recently was, she said, you know, I'm going to do something about this, not necessarily right away, right? And I said, well, okay, that's fine. But what should come first? Doing something or learning something?
Learning.
Yeah, there was my positive quote for the day today was, it was a Gary Keller quote, and he said, what can I think about, understand? There was one more, think about, understand, and finally do or put into practice while everyone else is doing right away. Maxwell talked about one of the great problems some people have based on their behaviors is they're doers, not thinkers. And even doers should, at their best, think first, understand first, then do. So I commend you on that. And what Lance, some of the things Lance talked about, and even some of the things Caleb talked about, education really is a prerequisite for you just running out there saying, hey, I'm on Preston Road, I'm an investor, or I'm looking for investors. A lot of us aren't quite ready yet. Okay, baby steps millionaire. All right, anything else? Anybody got anything? We've got an unbelievable interview we're going to do right here. And I mean, I can hardly wait.
Nick, I got one for you.
You just stole it.
What would you say to somebody that has the money, let's just say 200,000, but has no prerequisite to investing in real estate?
When you say no prerequisites to
No,
investing,
it's-
so no criteria,
Sure.
or are you saying no willingness?
They want to get into the space, but they just know they have the money, they want to put it somewhere, but they're
Okay,
not.
all right, so I think I would help them sketch out criteria. And at any point along the way, if they were being unreasonable about establishing criteria, it's kind of like the buyer who won't get pre-approved. There's a problem with that. Because then, remember I asked them the other day in our team meeting purposely, I said, what would you say to the guy who didn't want to be pre-approved? And he had a good answer. He said, well, sooner or later, he's going to have to be approved. So it's not like you're saving the paperwork or you're cutting it short. And why wouldn't you want to know all the surprises up front? All right, so if you've got a guy who has no criteria, but the money, and remember, there's a difference between having $200,000 and having $200,000 that you're willing to invest, right? Okay, let's
Let's just say for this scenario, willing to invest in.
that's fine.
Yeah.
So he's saying, so do you have a preference over single family versus multifamily? Well, no, not really. Well, single family, let's approach it on a single family basis because there's more of those. It's a little more straightforward. You live in a home, you kind of understand the dynamics of a home. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay. Where do you live? What areas are you familiar with in town? What criteria? I've always thought that buying a rental property is an advanced step for selling it. I wouldn't want to buy a rental property that I didn't think I could sell at some point. Not that I'm going to sell. I mean, at some point I will sell, but you know, I always think about saleability or resale. And resale means good schools. It means good neighborhoods. I mean, within reason, I mean, given the price. And so we start going through that. If they're cooperating with this little kind of analysis, I'm good. If they start holding up the brakes and say, no, I don't think that, no, I don't think that, no, I don't think that, then I'm starting to wonder whether they're really real. Okay. And one of their big questions would be, once we go through this and you establish your criteria, and I find a property that meets that criteria that you've agreed to, can you come see it quickly or can you act quickly? Meaning within 24 hours. Oh, no. It would take me at least a couple of weeks to see it, think about it. They're not real. That's what I'd say, Craig. Particularly today's market.
Sure.
Okay, remember, and Caleb kind of made reference to this. Lance also said this. Today, it's harder to find the property than it is the investor. So once you find the property, do you understand how many people are looking for that property? Every one of us had, I heard on the radio commercial today for the first time. I was going to tell you about this. And it talked about a realtor in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Some of you probably, maybe you've heard it. This was my first time to hear it. I'm not going to mention his name, but he's related to Mary Harker. And he said, the Harkers have thousands of buyers lined up, ready to buy. That's why they can list your property more competitively because they've got so many people ready to make an offer on it. And they said buyers all over the country. And I thought, what? And then I remember what they've done. The Harker 5-star team has teamed up with Sarah Reynolds. And so Dan and Sarah is how the radio commercial went. And at first I thought, who is Sarah? Sarah Reynolds, who's a mega agent out of
DC, I think.
is it DC?
No, she's Carolinas.
I thought it was Maryland. No, it's not Maryland. I don't know. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
It's Carolinas.
Okay, Carolinas. Must be the Carolinas. North Carolina. Okay.
Maybe Asheville.
Maybe Asheville. It's not Asheville, but all right, take over. Tell the rest of the story. But anyway, so the point is properties are in short supply, not buyers, and frankly, not investors. Now, complicate that with, we got buyers and we got investors. And they're different, even though they don't always call themselves different. So a buyer could call themselves an investor when they're really not. And if they're not ready to respond like, boom, immediately. If they're experienced, they probably understand that. Would you guys agree with that? That you respond quicker today than you did that first deal? Okay. All right, does that help? Everybody good? Does that help you?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so let's welcome up the McCoys. Come on up here. We got Zoom. Remember, we got Zoom. We're up to 4 people on Zoom. So come on up here.
Half of them are our team.
Yeah, that could be your team. All right. So, okay, so everybody can chip in. If you don't come up, we'll ask. You guys will be in the peanut gallery. Okay, so the McCoys. So let's set the stage. Approximately, how many properties do you guys have collectively as investments? Approximately 10. Now, that's 10 doors.
Yes.
Because some of yours are duplexes. And a duplex is 2 doors. So a lot of times investors talk about doors, not units. Okay, so about 10 units. So let's go back to when this kind of started. It was 2018 or 19. Okay, and you were showing who?
An investor.
You were showing an investor. Where were you showing them?
Greenville.
Greenville.
Texas.
Greenville, Texas, not Greenville Boulevard. Greenville, Texas. And what did you end up showing them?
I ended up showing them a townhome that after running the numbers for them, they didn't want to do. And then after running the numbers for us, it made sense.
Okay, and it was under construction.
Correct.
So it was new construction.
Yep.
In Greenville. How much have you sold in Greenville?
Zero.
So-
Maybe 1 in 20 years.
Okay, so they said no. And so you started thinking about it.
Yep.
And you ran some numbers, did some research, and you thought, I think it's a pretty good deal. So you took it to the tribe and the tribe acted immediately.
Yes.
Not exactly. No.
Mother tribe mixed it.
Yeah, Mother Tribe had some concerns.
Yes.
And when Mother Tribe has concerns, the whole tribe has concerns.
For a while.
All right, yeah, okay, but
Yeah.
we worked through it.
Right.
Okay, but if it was one of those deals that had to be acted on immediately, they'd have missed it. Okay, but by all indications, because it was under construction,
Correct.
so they probably had some time. Because there was more than one. Okay, so you were a little concerned about what?
Just out of our market area, not knowing the numbers, how it was going to increase in value.
Okay, so now let me tell you a question I asked her just a little while ago. Because to me, at first, it sounded like that could easily be fear of the unknown, which it was to some degree, especially in someone who's never bought a rental property. Okay, but Terry said, in fact, they had bought a rental property, a couple rental properties in Iowa.
Mhm.
Okay, in the past, so they were familiar with it. I wouldn't say it was an everyday deal. You haven't bought property in a long
Just
time.
dabbling.
And Greenville, you're in Kansas now, it's
Right.
Greenville. But you looked at the numbers and you said, okay, let's go for it. And ballpark price range,
That one came in at 168.
168. And did you get it rented right before the rent?
It did.
By the time you closed on it?
It was a week and a half after.
Okay, and you guys are managing it yourselves?
Correct.
Okay, so did that flip the switch for you guys a little bit? Or was your switch already flipped? You wanted to do more of this?
Yeah, we did more of it.
I know you did.
No, we
it-
wanted to
it
do
flipped
more
the
of it.
switch.
Yeah,
Flipped the
you said, okay, if we can do this, we should do this again, and we should do it again. And so give me another one, give me your, because you did it, give me the duplex story with the neighbor.
Oh, the neighbor.
Well, the first duplex we had to buy,
I
remember?
know, but then you met the neighbor.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, I know the story.
So,
So we had been watching. Oh, go ahead.
It's a well-oiled machine here, the real McCoy.
always in control. So, no, it was right before Christmas, we had purchased this one duplex from our good friends, and I was actually living in it and working out of it at that time while we were remodeling it. Anyway, it was right before Christmas, and I wanted to meet the next door neighbor. I saw them come in, and it was a gentleman and his wife. She was an agent with Evie, but anyway, went and introduced ourselves and just made the comment that, and my whole intention was to find out if they were interested in selling that duplex, because they had just remodeled the one side that someone had lived in for 17 years. So in that conversation, short conversation, he said, as a matter of fact, we would like to sell it. He was on a 26-year depreciation. I think it's 26-year depreciation, getting to the end of that 26 years, and was prepared to sell it and didn't want to deal with it. So we came to the point where sometime after the first of the year, he was going to check with his other tenant on the other side and find out if he was serious about buying it, because she had asked for that opportunity, first right of refusal. So she turned it down, and Terry and I quickly acted with him to get it closed. We basically just said, listen, let us have it appraised. Don't put it on the market. And whatever the appraisal price was, plus
On that particular one, we did not do that.
Did
She
not,
just had a
okay.
certain price.
whatever the
issue.
appraisal price was,
We did that
then
on the first one.
we would pay that amount, and that's what we did. We closed probably maybe 3 weeks after
Now,
that.
did one of the tenants stay in it?
And one of the tenants did stay in it, yes. That's
Okay.
correct.
Now, was his duplex a 2-unit duplex?
It was a 2
And the one you were in was 2 units?
was also.
Okay.
2.
So for those of you who don't know, some duplexes, the duplex can be sold 1 unit at a time. And in others, the way the zoning is done now, it can only be sold as 2 at a time. Unless you go back in and get it rezoned. Right.
Or it can be like in that particular strip of duplexes, it's the way it was surveyed,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
So you can spend the money and separate
Okay.
it. Yeah.
All right, so now all of a sudden you just pick up 4 more doors.
Right.
Within that. Now, I think I'm right on this. The characteristic of really both of them were somewhat elderly. And essentially, not only was the depreciation running out, but they kind of wanted to go in buy something, lock it and leave it, kind of low maintenance, didn't want to have to deal with all the things, right?
First one,
On the,
the first one that we bought,
on the
Oh, okay.
first one.
that led to the other 2.
Okay. So, but that's a good market, isn't it? It's a good market for people who are been in the property a long time, or even if they haven't been, if they're older. this is getting kind of sensitive, but they're my age or Mike's age, you know, and they've been there a
More
while.
Mike's age, right?
More Mike's age, you know, and,
Right, he was getting tired of it.
yeah, I mean,
that's
that's just one of the changes of life, isn't it? That you move because you don't want to have to deal with it anymore. And I mean, there's agents who specialize in listing properties of people who move to senior living facilities. And they even line up financing for the property to the next buyer. Anyway, it's kind of a cool deal. Okay, so let's go back just a little bit. I want to go back to the condo for a second, or townhouse. One of the things I asked, I said, now, so I'm a little surprised that the new townhouse project under construction would allow an investor. That doesn't always happen in new construction. So tell me how that worked.
Yeah, so on that one, we asked the, pretty much the sales rep there, and the townhomes were so new that they didn't have an HOA that was established by a management yet. And so it was all ran
Through the
through the builder. So they didn't have any rules set up for investors.
So now there's an HOA,
There is.
and now if I wanted to buy one as an investor, what's the rule now?
Actually, I don't think we've checked on that.
1 year.
Yeah, I think usually is 1 year.
You guys,
Now, the catch with this builder when
which
we
means you have
bought
to
it
live in it for a year.
was that if you didn't live in it a year, you didn't get the year warranty,
2 years.
2-year warranty.
Okay, we started with 2 years. If you didn't live in it, it went down to 1 year.
Okay, so what are your goals going forward? You have 10, is that what we said? What's your goal for 2022, Ron?
Our goal is to at least have 5 more investment properties.
So the goal's gone up a little bit since we last talked.
Great.
Well, it was 3, but I mean, we have to look
I thought it was
at.
3, 4, 5.
I mean,
I'm just, doors versus.
There's-
front.
we're learning different ways to manage this. And I
Yes.
think if we're able to find those properties in these price ranges,
So what you're saying is the number is not hard and fast. An opportunity will make you act.
correct.
But you're not out there looking for 20. But you'll also be disappointed if at the end of the year you haven't found one.
Correct.
Okay?
Well, I think Lance made a good point saying that when you go to list someone's house, like in the past, I always looked at it to list it instead of thinking, I might like to buy this. So you just have your radar up.
That was Glenn one.
With Glenn, yeah, because that's exactly what we're gonna do. I was like, oh yeah, we can list it. Let me run the numbers. And then we were like, no, why don't we buy it? So that's kind of how that happened.
Everybody got that? Now, here's an interesting thing that we talked about. So in their properties, in their 10 properties, they bought a little over $2 million worth of properties. Now, this is 2018 was the first. So 18, 19, 20, 4 years. They bought a little over $2 million worth of properties. Their estimate of value today is just under $3 million. So let's call it $700,000 of equity, new equity. If we take 80% of that as available for like a second lien, a group of second liens, that's $560,000. That could fund probably three of your new ones, something like that, depends, right? And the whole idea is that's tax what? Free, tax-free. Tax-free. Interesting. Okay, now one question I didn't ask you guys yesterday or the other day, but I can answer it now since you have your spreadsheet here. None are paid off yet.
Correct.
Okay, so any, let's see where the interest rates, we got the interest rates anywhere?
We did not on those.
Okay, so they're all new loans though.
They're all
Okay,
under 4.
so yeah, around 4, a little under 4. Okay, so another reason not to sell is, I mean, I don't know that they'll ever go any lower for an investor loan. But if you had, let's just say you had one that you've had for 6 or 7 years and it had a 6 or 7% rate on it, now would be the time to have an equity withdrawal and a refi down to the 4% range. Are most of your loans 15-year or 30?
30.
Okay. That's another thought. If you could afford the 15-year, matter of fact, based on your cash flow now, the next 3 in theory could be at 15 years. And your negative cash flow on those could be supported by the positive cash flow on these, right?
And I ran the numbers on snowballing. The debt, it would just be under 12 years to pay all these off with the strictly cash flow.
Oh, wow, okay. And so, but you would do it probably one at a time.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
So the idea would be you could do one probably in 3 years or 4 years. And you would take that payment and apply it plus the positive cash flow.
Correct.
That would be the snowball effect. Don't pay them all off the whole time. Pick one of them, the smallest debt, pay it off first, take that payment, apply it to the next one, and the positive cash flows. And I think you'll do it before 12 years. Yeah. Okay, any questions to the McCoys? Yes, sir.
If you don't know on top of your head, the duplex, you got the appraisal, did that cash flow?
Is that what you mean? Yeah, really, one side pays for the other.
Okay,
Mhm.
1% rule or?
It was
It's
more than
a
that.
lot more than that.
Yeah.
Really?
So our,
Uh-huh.
Wow, awesome.
on the town or on one of the duplexes, it's averaging about 23%, 22 to 23% ROI.
Well, and the other thing, we inherited the tenants, so they're at a lower level.
Sure.
Now, once they get out, we're gonna raise it all.
And the other house is remodeled. Check it. No, just because I was asking, because you got the appraisal rate, right? Normally you get we buy like houses, you get that equity. But if you buy it for 400,000, a lot of times it's not $2,000, it's like 1,200.
The one thing I told them, and James, I'll come to you next. One thing I told them in my past, I've been a little reluctant to do duplexes because I still have this mindset of reselling them at some point. And I want to resell one of my investment properties if I were to sell it to an owner occupant. Because they'll pay more than another investor will. But then with all this talk about buy and hold, suppose my mindset was, well, I don't care about buying a duplex because I'm never going to sell it. Or certainly not for the foreseeable future. And then there is a whole deal about in your estate that you can pass along a property to a beneficiary and they get the current market value as the new basis. And that's huge because Mike and I each have 2 properties that we got from 1031 exchanges. So those 2 properties, if you think about how long we held the predecessors, and then those 2 properties are probably out of depreciation, but the base and the mortgage, I mean, it would be a costly thing even with capital gains rates to sell now. But if you've already done that, you've already put those 2 in a trust with Nick and Chris or Karen. Anyway, that's not investing, that's tax planning, which is you can't tax plan if you don't have an investment. So we're putting the cart before the horse. James.
What is your level of concern or contingency plan if the rents just stop? And I've heard all these horror stories of, oh, well, with COVID, I can't pay, but I can stay here 3 years free. Or, you're going to kick me out, so I'm going to tear it up. Is there ever any level of concern of that?
Not with these.
Well, that's where being in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex is a huge plus.
Yeah, and I think the tenants were vetted really well before we got them. So we've really only put 2 tenants in. He put 1 in and then we put 1 in that one that was remodeled. And then, so they'll start turning over this year. So then we'll just vet them really well.
That's
But,
what
I mean, there's no
something
guarantee.
Dick mentioned earlier about what's holding you back. And one of my fears, what I've seen in the last 3 years are, you don't see that problem evidently in certain areas. It's just, it's.
Well, remember what I said last week, in the late 80s was when we had those first four. And the value of those went down 50%. 50%. Now, by the way, the values of everything across the board went down 50%. But our rents probably didn't go down more than about 10%. They didn't go down much at all. And then once you've done this for a while, you realize how inexpensive it is to do favors for a tenant and fix up little things for a tenant as opposed to having vacancy. Vacancy is a big fat zero. So I'll put up a little fresh paint for you, replace the front door, just to make sure you stay.
So I have a family question for y'all, because it seems like some of the family wants to use free cash flow to pay properties off. But it sounds like Ron wants to use the free cash flow to buy 5 properties. So how do those discussions?
That may be TMI.
That was me just running what it would take, or as far as like the snowball that we had talked about with Dave Ramsey.
I think he's in on the 5 also.
Yeah.
I'm just curious how you make that decision of whether to.
So
We asked Terry.
What is Terry one? Is that?
Yeah, what is Terry?
Really?
So let me give you, here's the question, and let me give you an example, because Mike and I were in another investment, not rental properties. We were in another investment. There were 4 partners, usually 4 partners. 2 partners wanted to take the positive cash flow and pay the mortgage down. The other 2 wanted the cash flow. And what we did was we settled for something in the middle. We took half of the cash flow and paid the mortgage down, and the other half of the cash flow, we made a distribution. So what's the lesson? The lesson is if you're in a partnership, even if it's especially if it's a family partnership, you want to make sure everyone's goals are in concert.
I think the actual lesson is don't be in a partnership.
Well, sometimes it can't be helped, right, partner? Jay.
Well, I was gonna comment, because I had the same conversation with an investor yesterday. He's worried, we're talking about, the COVID and moratorium and everything. And I said, hey, in theory, right, he's looking at 400 price points, right? I'm like, well, these are gonna be white collar. These are, B class properties. You said you can vet them. These are gonna be white collar executives, 15 years of job stuff. These aren't 50 grand, in the city where they're the waitress and stuff. So that's way you could leverage your tenant screening.
So that's part of your criteria. There's one group of criteria would be you want the low end stuff. One of ours, we use Title IX, they were using Title IX, and you get better rents on Title IX. There's all kinds of other issues in that price range. And we took those 4 that were low and older. One of the 4 had a pool. And we upgraded when we did a 1031. Now, I won't say they were all white collar, but they were all white or gray collar,
And it's mainly for location. We wanted to move into the better growth pattern and location from where the original ones were.
Okay, let's give the McCoys a hand. Great job. Okay, next week, Janie and I will be in Disney World. My wife knows though, so it's okay. So I'm not going to be here for next Tuesday. So I'll see you guys on the 25th, 2 weeks from today. All right, we'll have another fantastic guest. We've set the bar so high with these first 2 that I'm going to probably have to find somebody who's not in the class. They won't know how good they've got to be. So anyway. See you guys. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Remember, tomorrow, great by choice. So you get the chance to choose to show up and choose to get some stuff out of it. It'll be a great day.
It will. It's not pretty good by chance. It's great by choice.
Thank you, guys. Hey, Dick. Have a gift for you.
So you got a little one?
Thank you.
Couple years ago.
One of those things.
That's like your $500,000. Lance talked.
I just did it here.
But then
Yeah, it's kind of funny how things happen. Good seeing you too.
I'll look into that.
Hi.
Yeah.
I feel fine. I just have a baby cough, although Dick coughed more than I did, so I felt pretty good.
Particular activate.
I was like, always be better than everybody at everything.
Yes, I do. It's a contest.
Okay, I have a question for you.
Yes.
Okay, so I have cancer, and I feel maybe I have a task. I have not.
Jenny, can you hear when Lance was talking? Last week? That's okay.
And I'm sorry to come up with you.
I thought. Because he said. That's no problem. I'll get his another name. I'd like to go.
You want to see you tomorrow? Get it done?
That's great. You get and equity, appreciation. I said, now, he literally said, now, let's take land. He said, land, not a double dip.
Why don't we say that?
Land, you just get the potential appreciation. There's really little to no cash flows.
Correct. Correct. Which I was, one of the questions I wanted to ask them is how.
Okay. And it's kind of different. Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
Okay, so here's.
I like it.
So I have an investor, he has, like, I have. Okay, fine. That's one. Okay.
Yeah.
So, yes, because.
Yeah, I mean, you're not gonna.
Right. Yeah, let's show you.
He's like, they want to do development, so I'm assuming that.
You gotta work while. That's right. Yeah, we don't want to hear your name on the board.
You don't want to see me showing up until.
Thanks,
I
Dave.
can go up. Thank you. You're awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks.
So you
He said, I can